I find myself agreeing with much that has been said by the Father of the House and indeed my honourable friend for Cardiff West. I don't feel as though the case for privatisation has been made. As the honourable member for Cardiff West so eloquently conveyed in his imaginary conversation between the Minister and the Permanent Secretary, the channel is in rude financial health and is in danger of actually innovating digitally in a way that many of its commercial competitors look on with envy. So I don't think that the case has been made for privatisation in the interest of preserving the future of Channel 4. But what I would like to centre on in my remarks today is my concerns that I've raised in the past that privatisation would jeopardise the valuable investment and contribution that Channel 4 has made in communities across the UK as part of its public service remit, but particularly the contribution that it's made to production companies and content producers in the nations and the regions of the UK, thanks to some of the quotas that it has been set by government, yes, as part of its remit, but also the voluntary quotas that it has decided to exceed. Now, when I asked the Secretary of State and the Department how the government would ensure that such a valuable contribution would continue if privatisation proceeded, I was told to wait for the white paper, Mr Deputy Speaker, for further detail. Well, I waited. We've got the white paper, but I'm afraid that it offers very little by way of reassurance. In the white paper, the government makes a commitment to maintain Channel 4's mandatory obligations in terms of regional production and production commission outside of England. Now that, on first glance, is very much welcome, but it's by no means an improvement on the status quo, and in fact, it risks falling below the current level, as Channel 4, as I mentioned, exceeds the mandatory requirements that are set upon it. The mandatory quota for non-London produced content is currently about 35%, which is much lower than Channel 4's own voluntary quota, which it exceeds of 50%. Now, if a private owner aligns spending in the nations and regions to the mandatory quota alone, then Channel 4's contribution to GVA through its supply chain in the nations and regions would reduce by some 43%, or £1.2 billion over a 10-year period. And the independent report by Ernst & Young suggested that creative industries in Wales would be disproportionately hit, noting that a private owner would likely choose to shift commissioning spend to London's more concentrated production market, perhaps very much in response to some of the inflationary pressures in the sector, that they want to consolidate and concentrate many of its operations in order to save on costs. But this would have a very serious impact on jobs in Wales, as well as the other nations and regions of the UK. The jobs supported by Channel 4 in the nations and regions each year, both directly and through the supply chain, would reduce by some 60%. And in Wales, we know that the Channel 4 investment has amounted to more than 77 million in the past 10 years and supported over 200 jobs in 2019 alone. The government white paper, I'm afraid to say, Mr Deputy Speaker, fails to offer the reassurance that I was hoping that such a contribution will continue under privatisation, let alone explain how it might increase due to the supposed benefits that privatisation would bring it. Now, in evidence to the House of Lords Communications and Digital Committee, Tredwyr Annibynnol Cymru, the Welsh Independent Producers Group, stated, and I quote, "They cannot see any benefits of privatising Channel 4. Indeed, they expressed fear that privatisation will have a negative impact on the Welsh production sector and detailed concerns about the future of Channel 4's training programmes, including its flagship production training scheme, which is completely focused on the nations and regions and has already placed trainees with Welsh companies such as Bad Wolf, Yeti and Chwarel. Or indeed the Welsh Factual Fast Track scheme, which is addressing skills gaps to develop executive producers in the factual genre sector. Now, reduced spending on such schemes would not only impact jobs in the present, but it will also undermine the long-term development of the creative producers and journalists of the future. It is patently obvious, in my opinion, that the government's proposals to remove Channel 4's publisher broadcaster model, which ensures that the vast majority of Channel 4's content spend goes on original UK programming, will only do damage to the sector in Wales. And rather than delivering a public service remit, it would instead have to act solely on the direct profit motive. Now, in my opinion, that would mean that future investment will be ever more driven by market forces, and consider for a moment that Netflix production hub is in Surrey's Shepperton Studios and that Disney has a long-term lease for Pinewood Studios. If the government wishes for Channel 4 to follow in the footsteps of these companies, then we will almost certainly see production concentrate and consolidate in the southeast of England, contrary to the government's levelling up agenda. I'm afraid to say that the white paper and the proposals for Channel 4 has failed to reassure me that privatisation would deliver any other outcome. And Mr Deputy Speaker, I'm afraid to say that it's not only failing then the future of the cultural sector in Wales and other parts of the UK, but also the government's own levelling up objectives.